A lot has changed ever since this guy came out. Screens got bigger and bezels got smaller, and today in 2018 you can pick this thing up for less than $100. So is it worth it? How does it perform? And should you get one, or should you even be using one? Let's find out. Let's start with design. This is one of the legendary designs from Apple. In fact, Apple is still selling this design, and the square shaped body has the iPhone SE. It does have some upgraded processors and a better camera, and it's definitely gonna be a little faster than this guy, but it's also gonna be a lot more expensive. Where with this thing you can get a used 5S for less than $100 factory unlocked. And not only that, this is still one of the best phones you can get for one-hand use. Unless you have the budget for the SE, which has also significantly dropped in price ever since the iPhone 10. And make sure you check that review out if you haven't already, and in the meanwhile I'll really appreciate if you take a second out to subscribe. But anyways, back to the topic, you can't fall for the small screen size. This thing still has a lot of power and features packed in this little body. Holding it in hand, it still feels quite premium and even stands out with competition to the iPhone X. So to put into simple words, there's nothing the iPhone X can do and this thing can when it comes to daily usage. It's a beautiful looking phone, and honestly the only downfall in terms of design would be the 4-inch display. And as we started moving towards bezel-less phones and a bigger screen size, it won't be much longer the big bezel phones would start to disappear. But if you are okay with the small screen size for now, this thing definitely has a lot to offer. It's also one of the few phones with a headphone jack, so you might also see that as an added benefit. Other than that, we have a 1.2 megapixel front-facing camera, which is a little outdated nowadays, but it still gets the job done. The back-facing camera is 8 megapixels, which is also a little outdated when it comes to pixels, but performance-wise, it performs just fine. The pictures are still really sharp, a lot of detail and good colors, and that's honestly what matters here. Especially if you're taking pictures to upload them on Instagram, Snapchat, or anywhere on the internet, because they will end up compressing your pictures and videos. So an 8 or a 12 megapixel camera after the compression wouldn't really make a big difference. Alright, moving on, speaking in terms of storage, this is where the iPhone 5S is actually left behind. The 5S was available in 16, 32 and 64 GB, but for the most part if you're buying it used, you will probably find it in 16 GB. And to be honest, 16 GB is very limited storage in 2018. The base storage on the iPhone X is 64 GB, which is also arguably less than it should be. So living with a 16 GB device would be even harder. And with limited storage, you do have to compromise a lot in terms of performance, the amount of apps you can download, the amount of songs and pictures and all of that data you can have on your phone. So if you're interested in the 5S, go for a bigger storage than the base one, it will last you a lot longer. Also speaking in terms of storage, after upgrading to iOS 11, I did get some storage back since iOS 11 is a little smaller and a little more optimized. And that optimization does make the iPhone 5S still usable in 2018. It's running on 64-bit system with the Apple A7 chip, and surprisingly enough, this thing came out with iOS 7, and look at it today, still fighting competition with iOS 11. Now with iOS 11, I've noticed there's a lag between you pressing the button and the application actually launching up. And data also takes a little bit longer to load on the iPhone 5S, but the good thing is, once the app is up and running, it won't really make a difference if you're using it on a 5S or an iPhone X. New phones are definitely faster, but they're 10 times the money, and comparing that with the price, the iPhone 5S is totally worth it. And especially when playing games, I've noticed the gaming experience isn't that bad comparing how old this phone is and how affordable it is nowadays. It overall does a great job, although in some games I've noticed graphics are a little compromised to keep up with performance. And the iPhone 5S does heat up a little bit, but that's normal when playing high intensive games. Other than that, looking at the home screen, scrolling around, you won't really find a big difference from iOS 10 to iOS 11. Unless you notice the small animation changes or the control panel, which is an easy giveaway. And I'm talking about iOS 10 and 11 here because I've noticed after upgrading to iOS 11, the phone seems a little bit slower than it used to be. And Apple recently admitted to slowing down devices on purpose to save battery losing power, causing unexpected shutdowns. So this is something I figured out before Apple officially declared it. And it kind of makes sense looking at it from Apple's side. It's a partial effort in making you upgrade to a newer device and partially maintaining the standard of even old devices. I personally had problems with my iPhone 5S suddenly powering off even when the battery was 20 to 30%. Now you are able to get the performance back and remove the software limitations by replacing your battery. It's actually fairly cheap and easy, and you can do it yourself at home if you absolutely want the performance back. Now using third-party apps and surfing on content, it does take a little bit longer to load. When I reviewed this phone with iOS 10, I was quite happy with performance. With iOS 11, it seems to be a little more compromised in terms of speed, but the native animations, things like control panel and the basic software performs pretty good. Like everything is instant, quick and snappy. You don't feel like you're using an old phone until you start loading content. That's the only place that takes a little bit longer, and that's when you feel like you have an old device. In terms of battery life, it has a 1570 mAh battery, which is smaller, but the phone is even smaller. It has a small processor and a smaller display to power. And if you do end up replacing the battery, you will get a few extra hours on usage. But to put it into perspective, the phone I have takes about 2 hours to fully kill the battery when playing high intensive games. And I never ended up changing my batteries, and I had this phone for about 2 years now, and it was heavily used. Doing regular stuff like I would in a normal day, like checking social media, listening to music, it kind of gets me halfway through the day. If I compromise how much I'm using my phone, I can pull it off till school ends, but carrying a power bank would be ideal with a phone like this. And this is what I get for my phone. Things might be a little different for you. It totally depends on how old your phone is, if the battery was ever replaced, and how heavily your phone has been used. But again, if battery became an issue, it can easily be changed. In fact, I'll link a replacement kit down below along with some affordable power banks. But wrapping things up, in terms of performance, it still performs really good for someone who doesn't want to spend a ton or for someone who doesn't use their phone that much. And comparing to what you're paying, you're still getting a lot. It's a fully functional phone, great camera, and if you're okay waiting a few seconds for stuff to load up, you can save a ton. The small body size is great for one-hand use and very comfortable to carry around. The only thing I would recommend is go for something higher than the base storage. But let me know what you think about the iPhone 5s in 2018 in a comment down below, and subscribe for more content like this. And as always guys, thanks for watching.